In this video, we're going to take an introduction to StatCrunch and learn some of the important ways that we can bring in data and make graphs. This front page here is a page that you'll probably see when you open up StatCrunch from either MyLab and Mastering or from MyStatLab. So this basic page, I have told you to open StatCrunch to get to StatCrunch. So when you click on the link there, now we have an open data set. But what happens when you don't want to start from scratch and you already have a data set? So I'm going to go back to this main page here, and there's a couple ways that we can get data into StatCrunch. One of them is to search for data. So for an assignment, if I have already created a file for you and you know the name of it, if you click on Explore, and then we want to explore for data, you can type in the name of the data set. So let's say sample data for StatCrunch. That's the name of the file that I've created. And it lists all the files that match that name, and yep, that's me. And I'll click on it, and then it opens up the data in the browser right here. So here we go. We have a small data set and it's already preloaded for you. So what you might notice is that the columns are a little bit narrow. It's hard to read what's up here in this first row. This first row, not row 1, but row 0, is the name of your variable. And if you have a hard time reading it, you can click on the little divider and you get that little two-sided arrow. And then if you move the cursor over to the side, it will give you a wider column, and then you can read more of the variable. We have how many minutes does it take to get to school? Let's make this one. How many cars have you owned in your lifetime? How many ear piercings do you have yesterday? Let's see. How many times did you check your favorite social media platform? Are you currently married, and are you vegetarian or vegan? So those are the variables we're working with. I left one number right here, and you'll notice that there's words here. If you need to change any of these numbers for some reason, you have to do this in a special way. You can't just click the backspace and get rid of the numbers. You have to delete all of the words up until that number that you want to keep. There's also a blank space in the data set. That's okay. It just means that the person didn't answer that question. So it will affect your results because you are technically missing some data. So far we have searched for a data set and brought it into StatCrunch. But let's say that you want to type in your own data. You can click on the variable, delete the name, and let's say you have the person's age, and another question that you surveyed people was number of cars. And then tab through, and then you can put in all your data there. And I'm just going to make up some numbers here. Person is 22 years old, 25, 37, 54. Number of cars they've owned, 17. I'm just making up numbers here. 2, 4, 5. So I can create a data set just by typing in numbers as well. All right, the third way that we can get data is to copy and paste it from, let's say, a spreadsheet or a Google Docs or any other spreadsheet program. So the way to do this is I'm going to go to Data, Load from Paste. It brings up a new tab, and in this box here, we're going to paste our data from that previous location. So I have a spreadsheet open already, and this is an Excel spreadsheet with the data set that we've been looking at. And the first row of the spreadsheet, these are the variable names, and then I have the data down beneath. I'm going to change this number back to a 15. All right, so now I'm going to copy the data by clicking and dragging over all my numbers and words. And then I'm going to copy it by pushing the Command or the Control button and then the letter C. So Control C, Command C. You can also do that from the menu up here. So now I've copied the data and now I need to paste it into StatCrunch. So I'm going to go back into StatCrunch and I just put the cursor in the box and then I paste it by pushing Command V or Control V. And I get a nice list of data. You'll notice that all the words are kind of bunched up here, and that's because this box is too small. If we spread it out wide enough, eventually those really long variable names can be seen, but don't worry about it right now. When you've pasted it, the formatting will stay there and it will look okay after the import. So you don't have to do anything to this box. This bold word here, or words, use first line as variable names. This is really important because my initial data set had the variable names in that first row. I need to make sure that this box is checked because the first line was the variable names. If you don't check this box, it was checked by default. It's going to take the first row of numbers and put it as the labels, and you'll be missing your data. The delimiter is the tab. It's kind of already there. Those nice spaces are the tabs. You can give a name for this data set. Let's call it test data. You don't have to share it with everyone. You can just, keep it for yourself. These other optional things, you can just leave them blank. We're just trying to import data. And I skip all this and just click on load data. All right, so it labeled my test data, and my initial row, this gray area, are my variable names, and then I have all the data down beneath. I can scroll down through the data. Yep, looks like it's all right there. All right, so now we have 3 ways that we can bring in data. You can look for the file yourself, you can type in all the numbers yourself, or you can copy and paste your data into StatCrunch. 2 of your favorite buttons in StatCrunch are going to be Stat, where we do calculations, and Graph. The graph that I'm going to make first is a bar chart, and then later I'll make a histogram. The bar chart's actually called a bar plot in StatCrunch. And because I have all of my data, I have all those rows and columns, I'm going to select this. If I had a summary, something like there are 10 people who live 20 minutes from school, that would be a summary. I actually have all the rows and columns, so I have data. Let's click that. So I'm going to make a bar chart, and I need to pick a variable for my bar chart. Now, all the columns are listed here, but it only makes sense to make a bar chart with categorical data. So when I look at my numbers, let's slide this box over here. My data, I have some quantitative variables, and then I have a couple of categorical variables. So the bar chart can only be made with categorical data, so I can only choose from the last 2 groups, last 2 variables. So I'm going to select, are you currently married? And then because I want to see how that relates to people who are vegan or vegetarian, I'm going to group by the other variable. So we're going to see what this looks like in the end, but I'm basically splitting up my variable based on people's eating preferences. Maybe there's a difference. Maybe more people are married if they are vegetarian, or maybe not. I'm not sure. The rest of this, let's see, grouping options, we can split the bars, we can stack the bars, or we can make a separate graph for each group. I am going to stack the bars. You can always play around with this, try all 3, see what different visual output you get, because each graph might tell a little bit different story to different people. I'm going to use a frequency. Relative frequency would also be really interesting as well, but let's just stick with frequency and make it easy right now. Order by ascending, it's fine to just leave it right there. Graph properties, you'd want to put in some labels and a title, but for right now, I want to just look at my graph, and then I can make changes later. I'll show you how to edit it. So I'm going to push compute. All right, so another little pop-up happens here, And these are our results. So we have made a frequency graph. It says frequency right there. And along the bottom, one of the variables was, are you currently married? And then we grouped by, are you vegan or vegetarian? So when you group by, it's going to put the variable off to the side here. So this was your main variable that you were working with, and then we split them up into like subgroups basically. So if I said, are you currently married? There were, let's see, how many people that said no? 28. And of those 28, it says that the blue people, so the people who said no, there's 28 of them. So we have 28 people who are not vegan or vegetarian. If I go over to this other group, there is a frequency of 11 and in the blue, and then in the red there is a frequency of 1. So it means that one person of the married people are vegan or vegetarian, and then 11 people are not vegan or vegetarian. So this was a frequency group. Let's say I wanted to look at it as relative frequency because I want these bars to be the same height, so I can look at a percentage of each group. So basically 100% of the people who aren't married, they are not vegan or vegetarian. I know that's a lot of knots in there, but hopefully you understand. Let's go back to options. And now we're going to edit. And the type of graph, I'm going to make a relative frequency. Percent would also be the same thing. Percent just puts it out of 100. A relative frequency is out of 1. So let's change that, push compute. So here we go again. So are you currently married? No, 70% of people said that. And then 30% of people said they are. So that's a total of 100%. And then we can look at the percent here. So relative frequency 0.025. So 2.5% of people are vegan or vegetarian out of this sample, and then everyone else is not. And you can look at this full ratio right here. So 100% of people of the not married group are not vegan or vegetarian, and then almost all people in the married group are not vegan or vegetarian. Let's go back to the options again. Let's see. What do we want? Let's group by split the bars. Push compute again. Now what we have, when we change that option, is we have 2 columns for each answer. So it's hard to see because there's no one who is vegan or vegetarian from the singles group. But down over here in the currently married, the yes group, we've now split that up to be the almost 30% and then the 2.5% of people who are vegan or vegetarian. Let's look at this in a different way. I'm going to switch my variables. I'm going to graph, are you vegan or vegetarian? And I'm going to group by, are you currently married? So I'm going to switch those 2 categorical variables and push compute. Now it looks a little different because we have, it's like we're looking at a cube and we've twisted the cube, we get a different view. So now, are you vegan or vegetarian? The people who said yes, we still have those 2 columns, but of the people who said yes, now we can look at our legend over here. Are you currently married? The yes people, there was 2.5%, and the people who are not currently married, there's no one there. And then in the other category, are you vegan or vegetarian? No. It looks like overwhelmingly we have a lot of people who are single and fewer people who are married. So this is just a different way to twist the cube to look at the data set in a different way. And the order matters. The variables that you choose to group by and to graph give you totally different pictures of your data set. And it's really important to know what it is you're graphing, so that's down here along the bottom, and then how you're grouping it, so how you're separating it out. So let's do this again, but let's use two different variables. So I'm going to go back to graph, and this time I'm going to make a histogram. So I'm going to use quantitative data and group by something that's categorical. So the histogram is smart because it only gave you 4 variables. Notice that we have actually 6 in our data set, but to make a histogram you have to have numeric data, so it's automatically going to leave out the 2 variables that are categorical. Now, this is because I used words, yeses and nos. You can trick the data by using ones and zeros. Maybe 1 means yes, 0 means no. So that's a whole other story, but for right now, when you use words, the histogram will not pick up on those words, and you can only graph your numbers. So I'm curious how many cars you've owned, and I'm going to group by the variable, are you currently married? And I'm going to just graph this. I can add on the x-axis and y-axis labels and title later on, but right now let's just compute. All right, so we get a different picture when we have the histogram graphed, and that's because we have 2 different graphs. So notice up here it says 1 of 2, and then there's going to be a little arrow down here that gets us to the second graph. So up here, this title, are you currently married, equals no. This graph is only made with the people who are not married. And then a histogram was made just by default. It looks like it made bars that are about 2.5 units wide. I can tell because here's this mark off of 5 and halfway is 2.5. So it made a histogram that it thought was good enough to graph the data. If we don't like it, we can make it change. So these people are single. It looks like there were 17 people who have owned anywhere from 0 to 2 cars. Now, I know the bar goes up to 2.5, but it doesn't make sense to own 2.5 cars. So I can assume that 0 cars, 1 car, and 2 cars were located in this bar. This next bar, we have 5 people. So they have owned from 3, 4, and looks like it's going to stop right there. So we are just below 5. So 5 cars belongs in this next group. Have you owned 5 cars or 6 cars or 7 cars? You belong in this group here. So each bin is 2.5 numbers wide, if you will. All right, so we can go to the next page, and then we get the people who are married, and looks like we have quite a different distribution here. So that's the interesting thing about grouping by. You can get a different picture depending on how you slice the data. Looks like people who are not currently married, they have tended to own fewer cars, except for one person up here. They've owned 15 cars, or 16 or 17, I'm not sure. And then looks like people who are currently married, they've tended to own more cars in their lifetime. I also noticed there's a gap right here. That's kind of interesting. All right, let's go back to the options, and I want to edit. If I want to change the x-axis label, that's down here. I did notice that the variable name has already been placed on that x-axis, so I actually don't have to change the label that much because it's already good. The y-axis label, because I used frequency was listed there. If I wanted to make a different type of graph, so frequency was default, I could do relative frequency. It would then label this y-axis with relative frequency, but the default there was frequency, and that's good enough. And then if I want to have a title, let's throw that one in there. How many cars have you owned, grouped by marital status? and then I can push compute. Now when the graphs are made, it puts a bold title up there, and then the subheading here is each group. So the no group, and then over here is the yes group. Now, there is no way to get both of these pictures kind of superimposed on each other. The best you can do is edit again, and here's another option. For multiple graphs, you can do multiple rows or multiple columns per page. So if I do 2 columns, I can also check these boxes to use the same X and Y axis to get the same size of graph, which is really useful, nice and uniform for comparison's sake. Push compute. Here we go. We have the same y-axis, we have the same x-axis. Now it doesn't mean these bars are going to be the same, but we do have both pictures right next to each other. Now maybe it bothers you that down on the left side these bins go from 0 to 2.5, and on the right side it goes from 0 to 2. You know, for comparison's sake, it's hard to tell maybe who has more in a category when the categories are not the same from graph to graph. I'm going to go back to the options, edit, and I am going to, let's see, where do we have bins? Bins. Bins is another name for the bars of the graph. If I start it at 0 and make it a width of, I don't know, let's go for a width of 5, see what happens. So that means I'm going to count by 5s on my x-axis. Now if I don't like it, I can come back and change it later, but 5 is a nice counting number. 2 would also be good. 10, 1, just depending on the size of your data. 10s, 20s, 25s, you know, I don't know how much data you have, but look at the width of your data overall and then come up with a nice width for the bins so that you get a good picture. And let's push compute. All right, so it looks like I have 4 bars now per graph, and it looks like I'm getting a skewed distribution in both, but there's, you know, this lump right here versus the right graph. The people who aren't married, it tends to be very right skewed. So this gives me a pretty nice picture so I can easily compare the 2 groups and talk about the number of cars that each group has owned. I'm going to go back to the options and just show you what it looks like if we change the bins. Let's make bin widths of 1. This might be too many bars in the graph because there's also lots of gaps. Maybe the data is too summarized when I used a bin width of 1. Maybe I don't really care the difference between 1 and 2 cars because it's kind of the same. So I might use a wider bin than 1. Maybe 5 was too big, maybe 2 would be good, but just pick nice numbers for your bins. All right, so that was a lot of StatCrunch. It was how to import your data and then how to make graphs, a histogram, and a bar chart when you use a group by variable.